All right, good morning. Hope everyone's doing good. Let's get this fixed here. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here in just a second. But before we start, does anyone have any specific questions that they have that they're running into that they want to address? Anything at all? Okay. Okay, so there's a couple things that I wanted to go over today. We're seeing some relaxing in some of our efforts. So I want to talk to you about a couple things that are kind of being looked over at the moment in regards to deadlines and also the MLS exclusion form. So first I'm going to talk to you about the MLS exclusion form and show you where you can get that and make sure you understand how to do that. So as a reminder, the exclusion form is when your client, you're listing a property, your client doesn't want it to be on the MLS yet. So there's a lot of reasons not put it on the MLS. One is it's not ready to be shown yet. You want to sign the listing agreement. You want to have everything in place, but they're saying, I don't want to show it. I don't want people coming in. So that's one of the reasons. Another one would be where maybe you're working with a family member to buy it, but they want it to be listed. And so you're not going to actually put it on the MLS. So any of those reasons, you wouldn't put it on the MLS. So if that's the case, because we have to deal with clear cooperation rules, we need to make sure that we have disclosed why we're not putting it on the MLS. So I'm going to show you the new form and what we used to use, and then we'll go from there. So let's see. First, I'm going to go into my MLS. Okay, so you should be able to see, just move this around so I can see. Okay, so this is just the start of this. This is just the beginning of my MLS. Everyone should be similar. They might move things around. But if you go up here to the top right, top on this bar, you're going to see forms, and then you're going to see MLS forms. If you click on the MLS forms, now right in the top left corner, you're going to see the MLS listing exclusion form. If I click on that, it's going to be an online system. One of the things you're going to notice is that there isn't signatures here. Okay, so you as an agent are going to go in here, you're going to put the address in, effective date, expiration of the listing, your name, if there's a co-agent, the office that you're in, you'll put that one in there. And then it gives you an option for seller's instructions. Okay, so first one, don't submit the MLS until submission date below. So if I click on that one, it's going to give me a date that I can put in. This is if your client says, I don't want it to be live until, let's say June 1st. And you're saying, okay, we're going to do it June 1st. You put June 1st in there. Second option, don't submit the MLS until it's publicly marketed. Okay, so that basically means I'm not going to submit it to the MLS until I'm ready to actually market the property and show it. That's one of my favorite ones, because that doesn't lock somebody into a specific date, or if we want to list it earlier or later, we can decide based on me actually publicly marketing the property. The last one is don't submit the property to the MLS while the listing agreement for the property is in effect. So if they just don't want it on the MLS, so like if you get, let's say that they come to you and they say, I have a buyer that wants to buy the property, but I want you to represent me still, and you're doing contracts for them, then you might put this one, don't submit to the MLS at all. So those are the three choices you have. They're the same choices we had before. You're going to submit, and then this one you would submit this to the MLS once you have that. The biggest thing here is this last paragraph here. This, by submitting this form, I certify that I received prior written permission from the property seller to delay or withhold entry into the MLS. This is the key for us here at the office, prior written permission. So there's multiple ways to do that. But you can't just go in and just fill it out and send it in and then hope that we have something in writing. The office is going to require that if we don't put it on, we have something there. So what we used to use is this form. See, and this is still available in dotloop. So if you look at this form here, this is the old MLS exclusion form. So you used to have to fill this out, check the same 3 boxes, one of the ones you wanted, then you'd have your seller sign it, and then you as a broker, you as an agent sign it, or the broker would sign it. But then at the bottom here, this form must be submitted within 5 business days after the listing agreement has been signed. So you still need to submit something to the MLS. You're just going to go back to the MLS. The question is, now that you don't have to sign it, what do we need? So from the office standpoint, if you want to get this form and still do this form, you're still okay to do that. It's in dotloop, so you can still do that. Or if you're getting an email, or if you want to do an addendum to your exclusive right to sell that just says, don't put it on the MLS until it's publicly marketed, that works as well. We just need something in writing from your seller saying they don't want to put it on the MLS. And then you as an agent are going to go into the MLS and submit that form. So there's been some confusion on that and trying to figure out where this form is, this exclusion form, and why can't I have my seller sign it, or all kinds of different questions that we've gotten the last week or two about this. So does anyone have any questions about submitting the exclusion form? What we need for that? Okay, so that's the exclusion form. The next thing I wanted to talk about is dates. Okay, so we're starting to get pretty relaxed on our dates. So I'm going to share the REPC with you real quick. Okay, so you should be able to see that. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so there's a couple of dates in the REPC that we have to be aware of. Obviously, this first one, earnest money date, 4 calendar days after acceptance. That's our first date. That if we're going to come up on those 4 days, what I want to make sure we're doing is that we're a little more proactive with getting this done. Because what's happening is we're getting to the 4th day, and then on the 4th day, we're like, oh, I probably better get an extension. And we're getting extensions right at the very last minute. That's going to put your buyer in default right out of the gates. And one of the things that we want to make sure of is that when somebody is at default, it doesn't obligate the other party to perform. So the question that we got in regards to seller's disclosures deadline. Okay, the seller's agent did not get the PR to the buyer in time, and then they went forward through the contract, and then all the deadlines passed, and then the buyer canceled right before closing, and they canceled based on the seller defaulting because they didn't get the PR in time. So there's 2 sides, 2 arguments to it. One argument is, well, you passed the date and you didn't cancel, so it's not valid anymore. So that's one argument. The other argument is once somebody's defaulted, the other party's not obligated to perform. So that's where the argument came, because obviously if they passed all their deadlines, the seller wants the earnest money, and the buyer in this case was saying, no, we're getting the earnest money because you didn't give me the PR in time. After discussing with our attorney about it, the seller does have a really strong case. They have no cases that have gone all the distance with a judge to rule on it yet, but both parties have a case. And when you have 2 cases, then you spend a whole lot of money trying to figure out which side it is. So if there's a default on the contract, you have to be really careful, because that doesn't obligate the other person to perform, which means earnest money could be at stake for the buyer or for the seller. So the first one, 4 calendar days for earnest money. Now, I wanted to go through this section 21 real quick. It's called time.
Ask a question with
yeah,
regard to that last place. Say if that wouldn't it be a good idea if, say you're on the other side of the default. So for instance, if someone didn't get their earnest money and they were default, and as us agents, it shouldn't be like, oh, well, they defaulted, I'm going to just kind of hold that in our pocket in case we need it. I think proactively we should go as the agent who defaulted and say, do you still want to move forward? Wouldn't you think that, what would be the best thing as agent to do?
Yeah, anytime you can clarify it and make sure there's not a problem. I think in this case where I was talking about the listing agent not getting the PR to the buyer in time, I think from their perspective, they're like, well, let's just not call attention to it and see what happens. It wasn't you never have a problem until there's a problem. It's just everything can go through smoothly. We have tons of problems in our contracts, but as long as everybody moves forward and closes at the end, then it's not as big of a deal. But when there becomes a problem like this case where the buyer wanted to cancel and they're going back in time and saying, hey, we're canceling because you defaulted. For a long time, Russ and I looked at it and said, what you said, Chris, as far as you can't just keep it in your pocket and then bring it out when it suits your client's needs. But according to our attorney, there's a lot of arguments that say once they've defaulted, you've got to either address that like you're asking, Chris, yes, address it, or they could cancel at any time and pull that out. So that's different than I was assuming. And so when we talked to the attorney about it, and the biggest thing is there's just no case law pertaining it. So there is, hey, you move forward, everything was indicating you move forward, you can't just come back and cancel it. But they do have an argument, and anytime they have an argument, I would suggest trying to get that fixed. So if I was the buying or the listing agent on that particular transaction, doing an addendum saying PR was delivered on such and such date, that would protect them. So yeah, I would say try to fix it as best as possible. But I kind of feel like that seller's agent didn't want them to know that. But they did.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so section 21, this is where we get a little bit relaxed on. Time is of the essence. I'm just going to read it to you. Time is of the essence regarding the dates set forth in the REPC. Extensions must be agreed in writing by all parties, unless otherwise explicitly stated in the REPC. A performance under section of the REPC references dates shall absolutely be required by 5 p.m. Mountain Time on the stated date. And B, the terms days and calendar days shall mean calendar days and shall be counted beginning the day following the event which triggered the timing requirement. So acceptance or performance, dates, and time reference herein shall not be binding upon title companies, lenders, appraisers, and other parties to the REPC, except as otherwise agreed in writing by such non-parties. So let's just break this down really quick. One thing to keep in mind, doesn't matter where you are in the country. If you're using the Utah REPC, it's mountain time. So we had this problem when we used to go to Las Vegas for different conventions, and an agent was sending it in thinking he was sending it on time and ended up being late on it, and that caused a problem. So just remember, it's mountain time that we're trying to get to, 5 p.m. unless you say some specific time in your contract. So if you change that, then you're okay with looking at a different time, but everything else is 5 p.m. that time. So possession to be on such and such date. Well, that's possession at 5 p.m. that date, unless you have a specific time frame in there. Now, if you say at recording, then recording is a specific time, not a date. So you got to keep that in mind. The other thing is when you're counting deadlines, it counts the day after receipt. So it says 4 days from acceptance. So if I accept today, then day number 1 is tomorrow, 2, 3, 4 is how we're going to count those. So if you put in your contract deadlines down here where sellers, disclosures, due diligence, financing, if you don't put a hard date on that, if you put, 5 days after acceptance, 15 days after acceptance, all of those, you're counting the calendar days after that date has started. So just keep that in mind. Unless you're putting something in your REPC that's changing those deadlines, that's how it's going to be read. And what I'm finding here is these extensions, the extensions must be agreed upon by all parties in writing, is basically we've got to do an addendum to get it changed. So just coming up on your deadline and assuming that, oh yeah, it's not a big deal, we'll just get an addendum signed, can create a problem. One of the problems I've seen recently is we had a due diligence deadline that was today, and it was like 4:30 in the evening. So we had 30 minutes to get the deadline changed. Everybody said, yeah, we'll change the deadline, not a problem. They did an addendum that said the due diligence deadline will be on Monday, which is 3 days later. And then they passed 5 o'clock, sent the extension over, and then the seller decided that actually they didn't want to sign it and changed their mind. And now all of a sudden the due diligence deadline is passed and they didn't get that extension. So don't rely on the seller or the seller's agent or the buyer or the buyer's agent to say, oh yes, we're good with that, we're fine with signing that, because once it passes the deadline, people change their mind, and I don't want you to get into that problem. So everything has to be in writing. Make sure it's done well before the 5 p.m. deadline. And there's nothing wrong with, if you're trying to solve some issues, to extend the deadline, or just tell them, hey, before we're still working through these repairs and trying to figure it out, we need a couple more days to make sure we can do that. We're going to extend the due diligence deadline. Sellers are always trying to get you to get that deadline to pass so that their earnest money is non-refundable. But in the reality is, if you're going to put your client in that position, then you're going to either need to cancel the contract or risk moving forward. So sometimes it's in the best interest of both parties to just move that date a couple of days and make sure everybody's completely fine with moving forward. Any questions on time of the is of the essence? I think it's pretty self-explanatory about the way it's written, but you'd be surprised at how many people actually don't follow it or just think it's not a big deal. So it is a big deal. Contracts here in Utah just continue to move. They don't stop. Other states, so if you're dealing with clients from other states, some of their contracts don't continue to move forward. They actually go to the due diligence deadline and then you have to do something to move forward. Ours does not do that. Ours can go all the way. You could forget about the contract and go all the way to the settlement deadline. And if you don't settle, then you're in default. Okay, the last thing I want to talk to you about is section 25. So 24 really just, we have the 4 deadlines, so keep those in mind. It's our responsibility, not the sellers, not your buyers. You are the agent. It's your responsibility to make sure those deadlines are met or extended, or something happens with the contract so you can protect your clients. By missing these deadlines, that's mainly going to come back on you as an agent, not on the seller. So if they miss a deadline, say they go past their due diligence deadline, they don't hear anything from you, and then they want to cancel the contract and they lose their earnest money, and they come back and say, well, I don't know anything. I didn't know anything about the due diligence deadline, even though it's in the contract. The agent's got to have proof that they've talked about it with them. Okay, section 25, offers and time of acceptance. Okay, so buyer offers to purchase the property, above property in terms and conditions. The seller does not accept this offer by, then you're going to fill in the time, AM, PM, mountain time on this date. This offer shall lapse and the broker shall return the earnest money to the money deposit to the buyer. Okay, so this is basically we're giving the seller a timeline that they need to come back and they need to sign this or this contract expires. So we're using addendums to, you know, we're passing these deadlines, and so our contracts are expiring, and then we're just doing addendums to, you know, continue moving forward. We've got to make sure we understand what we're doing here, and there's two ways you can handle it. Okay, one is give yourself enough time to get things done. Easiest way to do that, communicate with the other agent on, hey, when do you think you can get this signed by your client? You know, what's realistic on that? I think buyers sometimes put a quick deadline here because they're like, I just wanted to make a decision really quick. I don't want them to delay this. I want to make a really quick decision. Well, I can see the logic in having your buyers do that, but at the same time, if the seller is going to counter the offer anyway, then they're going to counter it. It's going to be a new offer, so it doesn't really matter on that date, that deadline. So it's only if they're going to accept this one. The problem is so we have two different options. One is you just leave it blank. Okay, so let's say that we just decide that I'm going to leave it blank, and they can sign it, and I'm not going to ever, this will never lapse. That's the biggest problem we have with that, leaving it blank, is there's no, it doesn't expire. So if your contract has something specific in it, like earnest money to be non-refundable at acceptance, or, you know, after a certain deadline, all the earnest money is non-refundable, and then you don't have a date here, and then the seller comes back, let's say they come back 20 days later and sign it, and all of your deadlines are out, then you got yourself a problem. So if you're just going to leave it blank, you've got to make sure that you're protecting your client and that there's nothing in there that, because it's basically you have an open offer that never expires from that. There is times where I've left it blank where, like, let's say I'm changing the name or, you know, something easy that if they accepted later, it wouldn't change anything for my client. But other than that, I would put dates in there, but I would put enough of a date to get everything done. So hopefully that makes sense on the offer and acceptance. Whether you see it blank or you see a time in there. If there's a time in there and it has expired, you got to realize that it's saying that addendum has expired. Now, if you don't have a complete or an accepted offer yet, then the addendum and the REPC are all canceled. So you've got to address that if you're going to bring it up on the next addendum. You're gonna have to address that that contract was expired on there. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions on that?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about this. So you write an offer and they counter it. And then you go back with the counter. And so you're only countering one item and they accept it. Doesn't that still include all of the contract? Or do you have to specify all the terms of all the REPC and all the other addendums?
Yeah, no, it would include all of those because it's basically anything before that, it's including it. But where you get into the challenge is if one of the addendums has expired, it's mainly once you're have an accepted offer that you've got to really be watching those dates. But if you're not accepted yet and you're countering back and forth, I think it's a good practice to just make sure that everything's included in there, especially if an addendum, let's say that your counter is a counter addendum 3 and addendum 2 has something really important to you in there. I don't see any problem with doing a summary of what the terms are on your contract. But if you're not accepted yet, then yes, that counter would include everything prior to that.
Okay, that's what I've always understood, but I just wanted to clarify after you.
Yeah.
Just
did I say it? Was it confusing? Is that why?
No, it wasn't confusing. I just wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep,
Jason?
no problem.
Jason?
Okay, so I guess the message today would be, you know, it's our responsibility to watch our deadlines. It's our responsibility to make sure that we're not missing them, that we're not putting the wrong deadlines in there, that we're not counting the days wrong. You know, obviously, these are things that can cost a lot of money for a client by missing them and not getting them cleared up in the contract. So just watch your dates. Don't wait till 4:30, 4:45 to make decisions for your client. These dates should be well in advance. You should be able to know they're coming up. I would suggest start making decisions based on your dates well before the 4 o'clock time period. I would say on a weekly basis, we get somebody calling and saying, I've got to do something, and it's 4:45. So just try not to be in that manner.
Jason,
Yeah,
I was beginning to think I was just being ignored.
well, we try to. No, I didn't hear you.
I know. No, just another quick question. So if someone is slow responding to an offer and accepting an offer, and they go past the deadline, but they respond with a counter, you don't have to worry about extending acceptance deadlines, right? Because the counter offer starts the clock over, correct?
Right. That's a new deadline
Yeah.
for the contract.
So you don't have to specify in there, well, acceptance deadlines are to be this. You don't have to do that with a counter offer.
No, no, because the counter offer can fix those. If you already have an accepted offer and you're doing a counter or not a counter, you're doing an addendum, and then that addendum gets another addendum attached to it, then you absolutely need to fix it because now it's not part of that contract. I always think it's a good practice just to make sure everybody's on the right page. But anytime you write a new offer, it's basically like you're presenting a new offer. That offer lapsed. Now we're going to write a new offer. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other
Jason.
Yep.
I was just going to make a comment. One thing that I have found out works really good with my clients is I let them know their deadline dates are 5 o'clock on such and such a day, but I also tell them that it's best for us to respond. You know, I don't want to be the last minute because anything can go wrong. So I always communicate to them in an email that we need to, you know, make decisions, you know, at least I like to make decisions at least 24 hours prior to avoid that last minute panic. I know it can't always be done, but I think we need to set our clients up to know that yeah, this is your deadline date, but we don't want to wait till 5 o'clock on this day to make a decision.
Yeah. And I don't get any calls from you at 4:30 trying to extend your contract. So I think that's perfect. You know, in a perfect world, that's what everyone should be doing. Obviously, I know there's circumstances that come up last minute that say, we need to make an adjustment. We weren't aware of this adjustment, but those are your options to move forward. You still need a signature. I bring it up because I've had agents be like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll just get an extension. Or a lender will say, oh, don't worry about it. Just extend it for a couple days. We'll be fine. Well, it's not necessarily going to be fine. If the seller doesn't accept it, then it's not going to be fine to extend the deadlines. So, and I've seen situations where, you know, a backup offer is stronger than the primary offer. And so the seller just completely stops working with the buyer's agent because they want them to cancel. The buyer still wants to buy the property and they're moving through and they're just trying to get some help. So, you know, just be aware that not every time somebody says, oh, I want an extension, that's going to happen. So, okay. Any other questions? All right, you guys have a.
So Jason,
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
so it will be fair to say extensions beware. Don't count on it.
Yeah, I think I would approach it more of, I'm not gonna get an extension unless, you know, I'm doing it well in advance. You know, a last second extension is a very stressful moment for everybody, especially if there's earnest money online. In fact, I think 2 weeks ago, we had an agent in the office that there was $10,000 earnest money on the line, and they were trying to, they were either trying to cancel the contract at $450 or make an extension, and they didn't use the forms to do that right. And at 5:10, they called back and we said, well, did you get the extension accepted? And they said, oh, I couldn't get a hold of my seller, or my buyer. I couldn't get a hold of my buyer. And I said, so you do realize that now your buyer's losing their $10,000. And that was kind of a wake up call for them. So just be cautious with it. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. You guys have a great weekend. Enjoy the nice weather. And if you have any questions, reach out.
Thanks.
Jason.